Enlist has quickly become one of the most commonly used soybean herbicides, mainly because of the fact that it does allow quite a bit of flexibility, and it's one of our few products that actually get effective control on water hemp and Palmer amaranth in particular. The thing about Enlist, though, when it comes down to it, is it's not as easy as what Roundup used to be, where we could just spray and kill everything. It's one of those products where we do have to make sure we are spraying in ideal conditions and also making sure that we're spraying things correctly. So one of the things that always gets to me is I've gotten a lot of pictures like this over time, and I get this sent to me, and they say, "Well, what happened?" I don't know. At this point, it could be resistance. It could be that we just didn't kill the growing point. There could be a lot of different things. And so one of the things that we really have to look at when we start to talk about spraying Enlist and using Enlist to kill weeds is, how do we do this in an effective manner that completely kills that weed the first time? Because one of the things we really don't want to do is we really don't want to leave a weed like this, because these are the hardest to control weeds that we're going to deal with, because you've already almost killed it the first time and you basically created a zombie weed. Very, very challenging to kill the second time around. Anytime we're trying to kill a weed post-emerge, we actually have to go through 4 main steps to control those weeds. Okay, first step is pretty obvious. It's pretty easy. You have to contact the weed. Okay, now a lot of the times this is easier said than done, but this is all about making sure you have the right nozzles, the right gallons per acre, the right pressure, all of those things to make sure that every drop of that active ingredient that's coming out of that sprayer gets down and completely covers that weed so that we get more of that herbicide into the plant. The next step is the herbicide has to be absorbed into that leaf surface. Now, we would assume that whatever gets on the leaf surface will get into it, but that's not always the case. See, the problem is, once the herbicide dries on the leaf surface, there's going to be no additional uptake beyond that point. So once the herbicide dries, that's it. We're done. Okay, and so that time period from when you made that application in the first place to when the droplet dries is absolutely critical to get that herbicide absorption. If we don't get that herbicide absorption during that time, we are not going to get very good weed control. So, you think back to the previous 3 years in southern Iowa in particular, we've been fairly hot and dry when we've been trying to kill weeds. Now, why have we struggled so much to get weed control? Mainly it's because of the fact that we've had such hot and dry conditions, and that herbicide ends up evaporating a lot quicker. Okay, so how do we get around those type of things? Well, first and foremost, getting more into the plant during that time is absolutely critical. That's where using oils and some of those things can help us with it. Keeping the herbicide active longer on the leaf surface by having water conditioners, those type of things, all of those things play into absorbing that herbicide into that leaf surface. Next, the herbicide has to move from the leaf surface to the site of action. So for Enlist in particular, that site of action is going to be that growing point. So anything that I can do to get more of that herbicide into the plant is going to help us to move that just a little bit quicker down to that main growing point. The final step is the herbicide must reach a high enough concentration at the site of action to actually kill the weed. Now, anything that I can do to improve those first 3 steps is going to help us to improve our overall herbicide control. Okay, so that's our main goal of our discussion here today. The main way that we have to do this, specifically with Enlist and somewhat with Liberty as well, because as we know, a lot of these mixes will also go out with Liberty. We definitely need to have the right nozzles and gallons per acre. We need to have the right water conditioners, oils, and then drift and deposition aids. Okay, so starting with nozzles and gallons per acre, with Enlist specifically, we do have a very finite number of nozzles that we can use. Now, just because a nozzle is on the approved website for Enlist does not necessarily mean it's going to be a very good nozzle for spraying Enlist. Despite the fact that 2,4-D is a systemic chemical, we still need to get good enough coverage on that plant to actually get good control. And I will tell you, you cannot overcome your droplet size that's being put out by that nozzle by just changing gallons per acre. We actually have to physically change the nozzle. And what it comes down to is every time you drop your droplet size and cut it in half, volumetrically, you actually get 8 times as many droplets. So if I can maintain that droplet size where I need it to be, I'm going to get a lot better control. Okay, so based on recommendations with Enlist and the Enlist approved nozzles, these would be my recommendations. So a T-Jet makes an AIXR, Wilger makes an MR, and then John Deere makes a PS-LDM nozzle. Okay, now if you are dealing with pulse width modulation technology, either with the Exact Apply or Aim Command or Hawkeye system, you cannot use that AIXR nozzle. You will have to use either the MR nozzle or the PS-LDM from John Deere, due to the fact that you cannot use an air induction nozzle with pulse width modulation. The droplet size and the type of coverage that we get out of these nozzles, those absolutely critical. Here's a good example with Liberty. Okay, because back in 2018, I had a lot of farmers that were getting free nozzles to spray dicamba. And then those dicamba nozzles on soybeans were TTIs. Okay, and what I was trying to show with this demonstration is that if you use TTI nozzle, regardless of gallons per acre, you know, I bumped this one up to, for example, 20 gallons per acre. I compared it over to this XR nozzle at 10 gallons per acre. Look at the difference in control that we got. Again, you cannot overcome the droplet size coming out of that nozzle by just changing your gallons per acre. You actually have to change out that nozzle. Okay, so getting the right nozzles, the right gallons per acre is critical. I would do at least 15 gallons per acre, if not 20, with the Enlist technology. Okay, the more coverage that we can get, the better off we're going to be with that. Okay, next thing that we have to look at to get better control is making sure that that herbicide stays active as it's being sprayed. Okay, and one of those things that we really look for there is around water conditioners. 2,4-D or Enlist is what we refer to as a weak acid herbicide. Because it's a weak acid herbicide, it has a negative charge on it, and it can get bound up by things like calcium, magnesium, iron that's floating around in the water. Okay, well, what a water conditioner does, in this case, Class Act NG, is it actually prevents that tie-up from occurring and allows then that weed to get really good efficacy and get good control with that because of the fact that it's not being bound up. So this is a really cool high-speed video that looks at how much better control we get with a water conditioner compared to Enlist One on its own. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Class Act NG, Class Act NG is an AMS-based water conditioner plus a surfactant and what we call corn sorb technology. What that corn sorb technology really is doing for you is it's allowing that droplet to stay wetter longer on the leaf surface. The corn sorb is a combination of both alkyl polyglucoside, which would be your surfactant package in there, and high fructose corn syrup, which keeps that, it basically acts as a humectant and keeps the droplet wetter longer on the leaf surface. Okay, the reason that's so important is because, again, whenever that droplet dries, you're not going to get any additional uptake. So having that Class Act NG in there, keeping that droplet wetter longer, will improve your overall herbicide control. Okay, now this is looking at a video of it. We also do a lot with leaf uptake studies, and these leaf uptake studies are really cool to look at. Basically, what we're doing here is we're putting a known quantity of the herbicide on the leaf surface and measuring the total amount of uptake that we actually get into the leaf. Okay, so for example, and this looks like a lot of data, but I'll key in on a couple different things. So you take a look at Enlist 1 by itself. In this particular case, we only got about 24% uptake of the Enlist 1 by itself. Now, when we added in a product called Amsol, which is just a liquid AMS, we increased that control, almost doubled the amount of herbicide, a little over double actually, the amount of herbicide that gets into the plant. So that was a really neat look at what does a water conditioner actually do for you. Now, one thing I will caution you on, I know that we hear a lot, especially from the Liberty side of things, that, oh, let's just, we'll put more AMS in there, it'll work that much better. That is generally true of Liberty to a point, but things like Enlist 1 and glyphosate and those types of products, realistically, guys, we got to remember that we're treating the water, okay? And if we're starting to get more AMS in that spray tank than we actually truly need, in some cases, we can actually see that control go down. So my recommendation would be to stick with that, whatever the rate of AMS that your water test shows you need, or for example, like 5 quarts per 100 of Class Act did a really nice job of improving our overall weed control there. But if you get too much, so for example, here's 3 pounds of AMS per acre, you may actually see that control go down somewhat. The water conditioners, though, really do help with our overall weed control and do improve our weed control. So here's a good example of that with Enlist 1 versus Enlist 1 plus Class Act NG. This is looking at Palmer Amaranth. You can see the improvement that we get with that water conditioner, surfactant, and humectant properties to that Class Act NG. Other things that can help with our control, something like an oil. Okay? And oils are specifically in there to help melt through the waxy cuticles on that leaf surface. Now, here's an example with Superb and Destiny. There's a couple different oils that you can utilize with Enlist. My go-to to start is always going to be an MSO. Okay, and there's a couple different options. You can go Destiny, which is just the high surfactant MSO, or you can actually use something like a Strike Lock. So this is an example of Strike Lock. Strike Lock is the MSO, plus it has the drift reduction properties of Interlock. So that's a nice combination product, and in this case, you can see the improvement in weed control we get with that extra MSO as well. Now, the oils are there specifically to help with melting through the waxy cuticles that start to develop. And so that's really important, especially if we get into really hot and dry conditions, because oftentimes those hot and dry conditions, the plants will try to protect themselves and prevent then the loss of water to the environment. So they put this thick waxy cuticle on the surface of the leaf. And if we can use an oil to help penetrate through that, we do get a lot better control, not only with Enlist 1, but also with some of our other tank mix partners as well. Okay, so here you can see clethodim, which is a volunteer corn control product with Enlist in this case, versus clethodim with 2,4-D and Superb. You can see the added benefit we get with that as well. Now, generally, when we look at the label for oils, we are recommending this based on a volume-to-volume basis. But if you wanted to go look and see what the actual rate would be, this would be a good comparison. So I would say a majority of our MSOs probably go out at about 2 quarts per 100 gallons. And so 2 quarts per 100 gallons at 20 gallons per acre, we're looking at about 12.8 ounces per acre, or, with 15 gallons per acre, we're looking at 9.6. So it gives you a really easy way to identify how much is actually going out per acre there. Now, when we put all of this together, we do get a lot better control. So, we talked about the water conditioners, we talked about the oils. Those two components actually do a really nice job of increasing control. So this is going back to the uptake study again. Now, this is a little bit different look at it, though. So, for example, Enlist 1 plus Roundup Power Max in this particular study, this is the 2,4-D that's remaining on the leaf surface. So in this case, a higher number would actually be worse because this is what's actually being left on the leaf surface. So here you can see Roundup Power Max, we got about 23.3% of the 2,4-D that was remaining on the leaf surface. When we added in Class Act and Class Act plus Interlock, we cut that about in half. So we were able to, with the water conditioner, get a lot more consistency in the amount that we actually get into the plant. Then we added in the oils into this, and now all of a sudden we cut that in half again. So we're getting really, really good control here by having that water conditioner as the base with the Class Act NG, and then adding in the crop oil or MSO in these cases, with Superb being the crop oil and Strike Lock being the MSO. Now, as you're making adjuvant recommendations specifically around some of these oils, we do have to be a little bit cognizant of when we are spraying these. And so this is a old rule of thumb that I actually learned from Steve Barnhart back in the day. He talked a lot about if you get relative humidity and temperature together, that's really what can cause some additional crop response. So if you add up the relative humidity and the temperature and it equals greater than 150, we probably need to be backing off on that oil recommendation. Not taking it out, just backing it off, because of the fact with the high humidity and high temperature, you're going to get that much more uptake into that weed and into the crop as well. So you can see some pretty extensive crop response. Now, I wouldn't necessarily go away from it completely because we still need to get good weed control, and a little bit of crop response is not going to be the worst thing in the world. But we need to be cognizant of that because this is something that we haven't had to deal with in the past couple of years. The final thing that we can do to make Enlist work that much better is making sure that we have a good drift and deposition product in there. Now, we talk a lot and we spend a lot of time talking about drift. And drift is important, don't get me wrong, okay? But realistically, guys, the drift is only a small portion of the problem. You see, because you remember that these really small droplets, if they evaporate before they hit the target, we're not going to get very good control of that weed, right? And so you take a look at this video here, and I think this video does a nice job of demonstrating this. Regardless of the wind speed, guys, we are going to see better control by maintaining and controlling some of this droplet sizes coming out of the nozzle than if we weren't. Because here's the deal. Regardless of wind speed, you're always going to have wind hitting that boom because you're not moving at 0 miles per hour. You're moving across that field at 10, 15, maybe even 20 miles per hour. And what's happening is all these small driftable fines coming out of that nozzle just end up hanging up in the air. So we need to have something in there to help us maintain this droplet size, something like an interlock or a strike lock or a master lock, because of the fact that if we don't, a lot of these really small droplets will actually end up evaporating before they hit the target. And it's actually impressive how quickly some of these can evaporate. Okay. And we got to remember that a lot of these small droplets, they're not even large enough to necessarily maintain that terminal velocity coming out of that nozzle. And so they just hang up in the air. When you take a look at it, guys, at 20 microns, it takes 0.3 seconds for that droplet to evaporate. Now, that's very small droplet, don't get me wrong, but even at 50 microns, it's 1.5 seconds. 100 microns, 7 seconds. 115 microns, 16 seconds. So yes, am I worried about off-target movement? Sure. But what I'm more concerned about is the fact that some of these really, really small droplets here that are hanging up in the air are going to evaporate before they even get the chance to hit that target and be absorbed. That's why it's so important to maintain this droplet size. Now, I don't want to create huge droplets, right? And that's why I'm more focused on things like interlock, master lock, strike lock, those type of products, because I don't want to use things like ultra lock or on target, those DRA type products, because they make the droplet size too big and then I don't get coverage. But I do want to maintain these droplets so that I don't get these really small droplets and end up having evaporation. Now, Enlist One by itself actually does a fairly decent job at controlling some of these driftable fines. But when you start adding in things like glyphosate or things like Liberty or Charger or S-metallic or Dual, all of those products will actually increase these driftable fines and can cause more of those really fine droplets that causes our problems. So here's a good example with Enlist One plus Liberty, Enlist One plus Superb, in Section 3, symbol release, Charger Basic, Warrant. All of these benefited by having that interlock in the tank and being able to maintain it. And it's more than just interlock. You got master lock and strike lock as well. But it really does help us improve our coverage that we get. Here's an example with an AI nozzle. Here's a good example with Liberty. Going from 38% coverage with Liberty to 91% coverage. So I would strongly advise having some sort of a lock type of product. I would stay away from the ultra lock over here. That's more of your DRA for the dicamba molecule. But for sure have either an interlock, master lock, or strike lock in the tank to help with that. So as a review, we talked about nozzles, gallons per acre, water conditioners, oils, and drift and deposition aids. All of these coming together is what's going to give us our best chance in seeing good control with Enlist. Okay, so here would be my general recommendations on how we're going to see the best control. Notice I do have this broken out between Enlist and glyphosate versus Enlist and glufosinate. So, Roundup versus Liberty. I also have this broken out based on an average year or a hot and dry year. Now, the past 3 years have been a very hot and dry when we're spraying. Who knows what this next year will bring, but if we're in more of an average year, we would use these recommendations there. If you have any additional questions or want to reach out, feel free to reach out to any of your Winfield United staff, and they can help answer any of these questions that you may have further.